I wasn't sure what to expect when I decided to visit Turkmenistan. It's one of the most closed-off countries in the world and is often compared to North Korea. Isolated, surreal, difficult to get into, and overlooked or avoided by travelers. But that's exactly what made it so intriguing. On average, the entire country of Turkmenistan only gets around 15,000 tourists a year. Now, for comparison, that's half the number of visitors the Louvre Museum in Paris gets in one day. So if you're looking for a destination that's far from the maddening crowds, well, this is it. In this video, I'll take you around this unique, peculiar, and believe it or not, super friendly nation. Stay to the end and make up your own mind about whether this place is truly just another North Korea. If you read or watch anything about Turkmenistan, you'll come across stories about how this is Central Asia's North Korea. It's a weird, repressive dictatorship with a showpiece capital and has been called one of the worst places to live in the world. But you're watching this either because you're genuinely curious about the place or you want to go there yourself. So I'd politely recommend you find another video if you want a detailed investigation into the strange politics, corruption, human rights issues, or any other hot button issues. This is a travel video. I'm not a political scientist, and I spent less than a week in Turkmenistan. But my entire experience there was actually amazing. And even though I've been to almost 100 countries, this is one of the most surprising, peculiar, interesting, and memorable places I've ever been. First, an under 1 minute history. The area that's now Turkmenistan was once a key stop along the Silk Road and home to ancient civilizations over the centuries. It was ruled by big empires like the Persians, the Seljuks, and later it got leveled by Mongol invasions. After that, it was under the control of various Khanates and Persian rulers. In the 1800s, the Russian Empire took over, and it eventually became part of the Soviet Union. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, Turkmenistan became independent, and its first president, Saparmurat Niyazov, ran the country with a strong personality cult and pushed a very nationalistic agenda. He also began many of the capital Ashgabat's architectural projects. After his death in 2006, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov took over and kept tight control while continuing the building and softening some of Niyazov's more extreme policies. In 2022, his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, became president and has pretty much continued with his father's agenda. So let's talk logistics. You cannot just land at the Ashgabat Airport or cross a land border into Turkmenistan without advanced planning. All visitors must book a tour with a licensed guide or tour company in order to be issued a letter of invitation, which is required to obtain a visa. While you're in the country, you're the responsibility of your guide. Now that doesn't mean you cannot leave their side. In both cities we visited, we were free to wander off on our own and take local transportation without the group. So I booked a tour offered by a Canadian company called G Adventures. The 13-day tour began in Uzbekistan and ended in Turkmenistan. Now, if you're interested in the entirety of that itinerary, please check out my other videos. The links are in the description. So after a week traveling with the group through Uzbekistan, we entered Turkmenistan by land near the Uzbek city of Khiva. And we got there right when the border opened, and our group leader, Arslan, who had met us in Khiva the night before, handled the formalities and paperwork. After being stamped out of Uzbekistan, we took a short shuttle bus through no man's land to get to the Turkmen border. And even though it was June 2025, we were still given a mandatory PCR COVID test, which I'm told everyone always passes, and had to pay in cash in crisp US dollars for the test and visa. Total cost was $110 for adults and $85 for my 14-year-old son. In total, to go from the Uzbek border to being fully admitted into Turkmenistan, it took a little less than an hour and a half. Now, since you'll be traveling to Turkmenistan on a tour, the tour company will also book your hotels. If you do an accommodation search for Turkmenistan, you'll quickly find out you cannot book your own accommodation. So negotiate with your tour company if you have a specific type of hotel in mind. Pretty much every Turkmen hotel stay also includes breakfast. Another logistical peculiarity is money. Turkmenistan has an official exchange rate of 3.5 manat to $1 US, but the unofficial black market rate is actually around 15 manat to the US dollar. Given this, it's a really bad idea to use a credit card or ATM here, since that transaction will be done at the official rate, meaning it will cost you over 4 times as much as if you had paid with cash that you had obtained by exchanging at the unofficial rate. Without going into details, leave it to say that once you enter Turkmenistan, you'll be able to easily find someone happy to facilitate money changing at the unofficial rate. So before you enter, be sure you have enough crisp US dollars, without any stains or markings, to exchange for all of your expenses while in the country. Now, when considering how much to exchange, remember, it's a lot easier to convert dollars to manat than to do it the other way around. But the price level here is very affordable. A beer in a restaurant typically costs around 30 manat, that's 2 US dollars, and a great meal is seldom more than 120 manat. And although you won't be driving your own vehicle in Turkmenistan, the gasoline here is the cheapest I have ever seen. A95, which is super premium petrol, is 1.5 manat per liter. That converts to 10 US cents per liter, or 38 cents per gallon. No drones are allowed in the country, and yes, they do x-ray your bags, so don't try sneaking one in. Electrical outlets are Type C, which is exactly the same as most of Europe. The final logistical hurdle is cell communications and internet use are pretty limited here. You won't be able to buy a local SIM card or a virtual one either. I kept my phone on airplane mode my entire visit. Although most hotels have Wi-Fi, assume it'll be heavily restricted. Many websites won't load, and using a VPN is actually against the law. I found Google and Gmail worked fine. I was able to get my MSN email, and strangely enough, text messaging and FaceTime with my iPhone worked while I was on hotel Wi-Fi. However, WhatsApp did not. So I'd say just play it safe. Let loved ones know before you enter Turkmenistan that you're likely entering a communications black hole. So they should just assume the best if they don't hear from you on a daily basis. The television in our hotels had a mix of Russian, Persian, and Turkmen channels. The Turkmen channels were especially interesting. In terms of safety, it doesn't get any safer than here. You know, a long history of political repression does cultivate a very law-abiding population. But of course, follow your guide's instructions as far as restrictions on photography. Don't make disparaging statements about the government, and don't put your guide in a position to face repercussions from your misbehavior. He's looking out for you. Do the same for him. Honestly, as far as your well-being goes, a mild case of traveler's diarrhea is probably the #1 potential danger you'll face in Turkmenistan. Okay, so let's go through what we did. First stop, after crossing from Uzbekistan, was the border town of Dashoguz in northern Turkmenistan. Now, this isn't the most obvious stop on a tourist itinerary. That's actually what made it interesting. It's a quiet, off-the-radar city, acting mostly as a regional hub, and it gets very few tourists. Still, it's a gentle introduction to Turkmenistan. The city of about 100,000 people has a modern Soviet-planned layout with broad boulevards, parks, and a number of surprisingly large monuments and huge public plazas. Like many places in Turkmenistan, it's been undergoing steady development with new buildings clad in white marble and golden domes. So recently you've probably heard stories about over-tourism and anti-tourist protests going on in Europe. Well, let's just say Turkmenistan was the polar opposite. Most places we went, we were the only visitors. And the locals were curious, welcoming, accommodating, and universally friendly. For example, we stopped at a local grocery store in Dashoguz, and we were treated like we were something between celebrities and aliens from another planet. Curious glances, smiles, and of course, a few who wanted to practice English. Super fun. Our Dashoguz hotel was a bit of a curiosity as well. Sure, it had some peculiar design choices, cavernous public spaces, newspapers depicting the president's latest activities lining every table. And although it had at least a few hundred rooms, there were only a handful of guests other than our group of 15 staying there. But I can understand, there's not a long list of attractions within Dashoguz city. The main reason any travelers come here is to cross the border or visit the ancient city of Konye-Urgench, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site about 100 kilometers northwest of the city. This place was once the capital of the Khwarezm Empire and a major Silk Road city. At its peak, it had close to 500,000 residents, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Although most of it was destroyed first by Genghis Khan and later by Tamerlan, what remains is really haunting and beautiful. Now, we visited a number of towering monuments from the 11th to the 14th centuries rising out of the desert. The Gutluk Timur minaret, which at nearly 60 meters is one of the tallest brick minarets of Central Asia. The mausoleum of Turebek Khanum, famed for its elegant starred tiled dome, is one of the region's architectural masterpieces, and a number of other elaborately decorated mausoleums as well. Now, there's a number of Sufi shrines in the necropolis that still actually draw pilgrims today. Now, adding to all that, other than a few Turkmen making pilgrimages to the Sufi tombs, all of our visit, we had the entire site to ourselves. From there, we set off into the Karakum Desert, where the land stretches flat and empty for hours. Now, even though this is the main highway between the capital of Ashgabat and one of Turkmenistan's largest cities, large portions of the road are rough, very rough, and our 4x4 drivers would regularly veer off the potholed road to push through dry riverbeds and dunes running parallel to the potholed tarmac. Now, after a few tire repairs and about 5 hours of driving, we turned off the highway, drove a couple of minutes through the dunes, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the ground gave way to a gaping crater on fire. This crater, better known as the Door to Hell, is a natural gas field that collapsed into an underground cavern near the village of Darvaza. In 1971, Soviet geologists were drilling for gas when the ground gave way, creating a pit over 70 meters wide and 30 meters deep. Fearing the release of toxic gas, the engineers set it on fire, thinking it would burn off in a few days. Well, 50 years later, it's still going. Standing at the edge of the crater, especially at night, is surreal. The flames constantly dance and shift, glowing red and orange against the dark desert sky. And it smells reminiscent of a freshly lit barbecue grill. The heat radiates toward you, even from a distance, and the sound, a low rumbling, gives it an eerie, almost alive presence. We stayed nearby at a yurt camp, with basic facilities and meals provided. There were a few dozen yurts in the camp, but since it was summer low season, there was only about 20 guests in the village. But our guide said during spring and autumn, the place can actually completely fill up. Other than the yurt villages near the crater, there's no official infrastructure, just open desert. And if you're an early riser, it's totally worthwhile to walk back to the crater in the early morning to watch the sunrise. And even though there might be a few others there, most of the time I had the entire crater to myself. So just a side note, the Turkmen government is currently drilling a well nearby to siphon off the leaking gas, which will eventually cause the flames to go out. So if you want to see this bizarre wonder, don't delay. The Door to Hell's fires may be extinguished soon. Oh, and a short drive from the Door to Hell are two lesser-known craters, the Bubbling Mud Crater and the Water-Filled Crater. The next morning, we drove another 4 hours or so south, and we arrived in Ashgabat. Now, after hours of bumping along the neglected desert highway, crossing into this ultra-modern capital city is a bit like the scene from the Hunger Games movies, of going from the underdeveloped districts to entering the luxe capital of Panem. Huge wide avenues with white marble-clad buildings and ultra-modern architecture. I was in awe of the gargantuan scale and no expense spared design of everything from the stadiums all the way down to the payphone booths. In Ashgabat, we stayed in the Sport Hotel, which was adjacent to the Olympic complex that had been built in 2017 to host the Asian Indoor and Martial Arts Games. Now, it was a great location, right across the street from the huge Berkerar shopping mall, and an easy walk to the Independence Park. Unlike the hotel in Dashoguz, there were definitely plenty of other guests staying here, and we didn't cause quite the same curiosity from the locals as we did a few days earlier. A lovely sunset dinner at a rooftop restaurant in the center of Independence Park gave us wonderful views of the city as the sun went down and the abundance of rainbow lighting on the buildings came up. The next day, we had a city tour of Ashgabat and nearby ancient Nisa, and I will say, it was one of the most memorable and unique city tours I have ever had. So the day started with a short 15-minute drive out of the city to visit Old Nisa, the 5,000-year-old capital of the Parthian Empire. Sections of the place were partially restored, but most of the site was still in an unrestored state. However, our later visit to the National Museum did illuminate much of what we saw and showed a number of artifacts recovered from the site as well. The rest of the tour focused on Ashgabat, a visit to the gargantuan and vast combined memorial to World War II and the devastating 1948 earthquake was pretty impressive to say the least. Also a bit strange, since our small group were the only visitors at the expansive site. A few other stops included the curiously designed wedding palace building and a stop to check out a newly completed gargantuan 80-meter high statue of Maramaguli Piragi, the national poet of Turkmenistan. A particularly strange sight was at a roundabout on the edge of the city that had a combined bicycle, Silk Road, horse, and Turkmenistan tribute sculpture. This was the so-called Monument to the Bicycle, and it was built in 2020 to celebrate World Bicycle Day. Now, it's a 30-meter tall sculpture with a huge blue disc showing a map of the country, surrounded by helmet-wearing golden cyclists that look like they're riding around the world. Now, at the base, you'll see statues of winged horses, olive branches, and other national symbols like the Central Asian shepherd dog. Now, like much of Ashgabat, it's pretty over the top, but I loved it just for its audacious weirdness. To add to the strangeness, we stopped at this traffic circle for almost 10 minutes. Despite the fact that two 6-lane roads fed into the circle, not a single vehicle drove by us the entire time we were there. Now, full disclosure, this is at the edge of the new part of the city. It was 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and one of the roads feeding into the circle ends at a construction project. So I wouldn't expect too much traffic? But 0 cars from 2 intersecting 6-lane roads in 10 minutes? The next stop was at the National Museum of Turkmenistan. The museum was enormous and lavishly constructed. And eerily, other than the staff, again, we were the only visitors. We had an excellent tour from a very knowledgeable museum guide who showed us through the second floor exhibits on the ancient history of Turkmenistan. Now, it was beautifully exhibited and presented, and a number of the dioramas and artifacts on display were really quite stunning. And a bonus, there was plenty of artifacts and interpretive materials about places that we'd previously visited, like Old Nisa and Konye-Urgench, which we had seen 2 days before. Before departing the museum, we also did a quick walkthrough of the ground floor, which was quite a peculiar contrast from the academic and historically based second story of the museum. Without going into a long commentary, let's just say it was filled with an eclectic and unique collection of gifts, portraits, sculptures, and other items relating to Turkmenistan's national symbols, its recent history, and its leaders, both past and present. Our next stop was the Russian Bazaar. Now, this is located in the low-rise, Soviet-planned, older part of the city. Now, unfortunately, there's a number of sensitive buildings nearby, so we were told photography was not allowed. The market included all the fresh fruits, vegetables, and meats you'd expect in an open-air market, along with the usual assortment of shops selling knockoff branded clothing, phone accessories, and household goods. One item I'd never seen for sale at a bazaar before was caviar, which a number of merchants had at pretty reasonable prices. For caviar, that is. There was also a number of shops selling Turkmenistan souvenirs. So if you're looking for a bargain on a fridge magnet, furry hat, or other treasures like these, this should be your first stop. The final few places we visited on the tour were in the Independence Park. We made a quick stop for pictures at the bizarre monument to the Ruhnama, which is the first president's rambling book of Turkmen history, culture, ethics, and philosophy. We then wrapped it up with a visit to the Independence Monument. This huge, eye-catching structure was built in 2001 to celebrate Turkmenistan's first decade of independence. It's got a big white base shaped like a yurt, and a tall marble column rising from it, and a golden crescent with 5 stars on top to represent the country's main tribes. The monument sits in a massive park full of fountains, which were dry during my visit, statues of national heroes, and of course, a golden statue of the first president, Niyazov. Inside, there's a museum and a high observation deck, but unfortunately it wasn't open. The next morning, we departed from Ashgabat's flashy and gorgeous falcon-shaped international airport. This place was lavish and incredible, and it had at least a few dozen gates. But strangely enough, only 7 international flights were scheduled to depart that day. So most of the terminal was completely empty, and 3 Turkmenistan Airlines 777-300s were parked unused next to the terminal building. I think there was more security employees in the airport than passengers, since I had my bags x-rayed 3 times at different checkpoints and my passport examined on 5 separate occasions before I made it to the gate area. There was also a number of duty-free stores, and they had some vaguely familiar yet unfamiliar brands. All right, let's wrap this up. Turkmenistan is supposed to be difficult in every way. Well, that wasn't my experience at all. Indeed, I did have to book a tour to come here. I did have to wait about an hour and a half at the border to have my visa processed. I wasn't able to take photos of every building I saw, and phone and internet use was definitely limited. But was it visiting a repressive police state? Well, I don't live there, so I can't truly answer this question, but in my experience as a visitor, it certainly didn't feel like Big Brother was watching. We could go places without a guide, while in Dashoguz and Ashgabat, we were free to go for walks or take taxis anywhere we wanted without supervision. Our guide, Arslan, was knowledgeable, friendly, and a t-shirt and sneaker wearing tour guide. He's just a regular dude, and if he lived in my town, I'd likely be friends with him. Yes, he would occasionally give us advance warnings about not photographing police or sensitive government buildings. And yes, some of his answers to questions were a bit qualified and guarded, but he certainly was not an earpiece-wearing government stooge whispering into a microphone, recording our conversations, monitoring our every move, and spewing rehearsed lines of propaganda. Now, was Turkmenistan peculiar, with a personality cult directed toward its leadership and horses? Yes, but was it filled with a harshly repressed population living in misery with no freedom or opportunities? Well, it certainly didn't feel that way. When I was preparing for this trip, I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, which presented this nation as horrific. A white marble shell filled with megalomaniac-inspired monuments and a robotic population of oppressively governed people living in fear and poverty, all while being forcibly programmed to worship their president. Now, could I edit a clickbait video to support this narrative to get more views? Well, with the footage I shot, I probably could. But a few empty highways, clips of eccentric and odd monuments, and pictures of a president with weird backgrounds are a very selective and highly curated view of a pretty big and complex nation. Is the country filled with white buildings? Yes. Are there photos of the president all over the place? Yep. There's a lot of them. Is the Capitol designed to be a trophy showpiece with over-the-top architecture and huge buildings and plazas that reinforce the power of the state? Well, indeed it is. Are there huge parts of the new city that are at times devoid of people? Absolutely. But are there places here that are vibrant and full of life? Definitely. Are there regular people going about their daily lives? You bet. I saw children playing, people shopping, families dining, friends hanging out. Nobody I encountered was afraid of outsiders. Everyone I interacted with was universally friendly and helpful. At least in my limited experience, anyone that calls Turkmenistan one of the worst places to live in the world either probably hasn't traveled very much or is basing that comment solely on personal liberties. Since I only visited for a few days, I can't really comment on Turkmen's political or economic freedoms or lack thereof. But I can tell you what I didn't see. In driving across the entire country from north to south, I saw nobody who obviously seemed to be in poverty. I encountered no beggars or bedraggled children. I saw nobody sleeping on the street, in tents, or living in shantytowns or slums. Other than Singapore, I have never visited a nation I could say that about. To me, Turkmenistan represents really one of the joys of travel. It's a place that truly challenges your expectations and offers something that will likely be the most peculiar and fascinating place you'll ever visit. From over-the-top architecture to burning craters of hellfire, to warm and genuine hospitality. I'd encourage you to visit Turkmenistan yourself and make up your own mind. Thanks for tuning in. A subscribe is sincerely appreciated and helps me to continue the channel.